Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is Multifamily Chronicles, and I'm your host, Adrian Daniela. Today with me, I have not one, but two guests. My guests today are Kara Rice and Jen Piccotti. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Adrian. It's a pleasure to be here. Hey, Jen.
Hello.
So I wanted to say this is not the only premiere that, I have two guests on the show at once, but also Jen is Jen's first time here. So welcome to the show, Jen.
Thanks so much for having me. I have been enjoying all of your content and everything that you're producing for our industry for such a long time. So this is a thrill.
It's a real pleasure to have you on. And also, I wanted to say that Kara was the first person that accepted the invitation to come on my show. So the very first episode that I had on Multifamily Chronicles was with Kara. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, so am I. Such an honor for you to tap me for that. And it's a compliment that you invited me back. So thank you, Adrian.
It's always great to have you on. There's always so much that the industry needs to hear from you and from you both. So I want to get started with you, Jen, and I want to ask you to tell the audience a little bit about some great things that you have going on at Swift Bunny.
Well, at Swift Bunny, we are focused on feedback for the multifamily industry. And for the past 4 years, we have been really focused in on employee engagement, really understanding what's working, what's not working, what are the greatest challenges, what are the greatest benefits of being an employee within the multifamily space. So we're working with a lot of companies and helping them get employee feedback to help them be better. And we now have over 10,000 employees participating in employee feedback surveys. So we have such a rich wealth of knowledge and understanding of trends within our industry that I'm really excited about, and really helping companies not only be able to hold on to their great current employees, but also have a better understanding of how to attract new employees, which is great. And now we are moving into the resident survey space so that we're going to have engagement on a variety of sides within our industry.
It's very, very exciting to see how your company, evolves and grows, not just from business perspective, but from a perspective of covering so many areas of multifamily. And I wanted to say this type of services was so much needed because I learned that employee surveys typically could be tricky, could be not telling a full story. But when they're really well administrated, the questions are asked the right way, then you could get a wealth of knowledge of information from your employees. Kara, do you disagree? Do you agree?
Oh, you are exactly right. And one of the key elements there, I think, Adrian, is using a third party to administer those surveys, because it really helps the survey participant, the employee, to feel safe in being able to share their honest feedback. So that, I think, is critically important, because if you want candid input from your team members, they have to be able to offer that in a safe space. So that really, really helps. And the other thing that we think is so important is this has to be ongoing, because you can't just send a survey out once every year or once every 2 years, which is commonly done in our industry, and expect that you're really going to get the level of feedback that you need. You've got to be doing it constantly, frequently, especially when you consider a couple of things. The high turnover in our business. So somebody that you surveyed last December, for example, how likely are they going to be there next December? It's crazy that you wouldn't check in with team members in the interim. And the other thing is that circumstances change. So you may be perfectly content on site 1 month, but then the next month you've got massive move outs, or you've got, high leasing season. Circumstances change, and all of that impacts the employee experience. So those are just a couple of reasons why we think it's very important, imperative really, to be constantly in communication and getting that input from your team members.
Yeah, I think I couldn't say it better. Circumstances change. I'm only thinking one thing, right, that I'm very passionate about, I'm very focused on. the labor market, right? Because labor market shifts like overnight. You
Right.
wake up you wake up one morning and it's a different labor market. Like it shifts so much. It has been shifting so much for the past probably 3 to 5 years, at least 3 years. And then when that changes, people's circumstance change, and then their view of certain topics changes, like their life changes, everything changes. And then for us to have this static view, to look and say, well, this is what our employees thought about us 12 months ago or even 6 months, I think it's not beneficial for us as employers, because that information becomes obsolete fast. Jen, do you disagree?
Oh, you're right. Data has a shelf life. And I feel like the shelf life is getting shorter and shorter by the month. And I think that the benefit of being able to get this ongoing feedback is not only are you getting an understanding of what's happening right now, but oftentimes they'll start signaling what may be happening in the next few months. I know that we've had some situations where there was a corporate shakeup with one of our clients, and some turmoil that was happening there, some unexpected changes. And I think the corporate team assumed that it would be isolated, that it would just be impacting the people who worked directly in that corporate office. And what they found is there was a significant ripple effect of concern and worry and uncertainty that was happening on site that they wouldn't have been aware of had they not been getting this ongoing feedback. And they were able to jump in and say, oh, okay, here's what's really happening. Here's what impacts or doesn't impact you. And they were able to really reassure everyone, and not have this, big panic of something that they didn't need to be worried about. So it's important to be getting those clues all along of like, how are things going? What's impacting them? What's not impacting them? It can be so valuable.
Yeah, and it also goes to real-time information, right? We live, like our lives are inside this device right here.
Oh yeah.
Day in and day out. Whether we want it or not, it's not about liking it or disliking it. It's a reality, right? We're connected. Like this is an extension of us. So if we live our lives like that, why should we believe that certain parts of our life had to be static? Like things had to be the way we like them to be. Like back in a day, it's like back in a day used to be like this. For example, back in a day, we used to hire technicians and qualified technicians for $15, $16 an hour. That was the start, that was the start rate. Well, guess what? That's back, like that's history right now. Because reality, you're not finding employees for that much anymore. The things have changed so much drastically from back in the day. So that goes and applies to the whole life of our entire lives, really, and especially in our industry, right? So we're affected as well.
That is for sure.
So the next question, the next topic that I want to touch on, I'm gonna start with you, Kara. Onboarding and its impact on employee engagement. And I do want to ask you. I know that you have some recent data that you would like to share with the audience. So I'd like you, if you don't mind, to start with that, sharing the results.
Yeah, thanks, Adrienne. We love this topic. Jen and I have been recently really focused in on how well we are doing as an industry and welcoming new team members through that onboarding process. And I think it's really an area where there's a lot of opportunity for us to get better. And so that's what we've been diving into and just trying to get very specific feedback from on-site team members in particular to see how it's going, what's working well, and where the opportunities are for improvement. And one of the things that I like in onboarding too is it's all about making a good first impression. And we're really good at that in terms of our leasing activities, right? It's something that we really focus on, and we care about curb appeal and the decor in the office and how we greet customers when they walk in. So making a good first impression is a skill that we have. And so I encourage folks to think about translating that skill over to how they welcome new employees to the organization. And I really think that that can be a helpful comparison for folks, at least I hope it can be, and really turn a light bulb on as to, yeah, we know how to do this. Let's just reconsider those new employees and think about them as customers, because they really are. So anyway, a couple of things that I want to point out in the data. And first off, I just have to nod to Jen here and acknowledge that she's the one who dives in and really digs through all of the data that comes in from our clients. She's the spreadsheet nerd over here. So thank you, Jen, for doing all of that research. But a couple of things that we recently highlighted in a webinar that we did over at Swift Bunny was a look at the first days of employment, and actually specifically day one. How is day one going for you when you come into the community that you work at? And for the most part, employees are saying that day one is pretty well organized. We have 80% agreement. So 80% of employees say, yeah, and first day of work was pretty well organized. And we have 76% who say a well-organized training plan was provided. So opportunity for improvement there for sure, but it's not terrible to my mind. And it gets kind of interesting to dig through how the different employee groups responded to that. So on organization, for example, on-site management, there's a lot lower agreement there. 34% of on-site managements were like, not very well organized. That kind of makes sense to me, because the manager is probably the one who's being required to do that organization for onboarding, right? So when a manager is coming into a vacant seat, there maybe isn't as much organization or anybody else kind of filling that spot. But there's one that I wanted to shine a light on here, and Jen, please chime in, because I know you're passionate about this one too. But we ask this question in a survey that we send out to employees on day 5 of their employment. We ask for their level of agreement with this statement: my supervisor provided a clear explanation of my duties and job expectations. So do they know what they're getting into? And here's where I think it gets really interesting. On day 5, we have very high level of agreement with that statement. We've got 87% of employees saying, yeah, my supervisor did a good job of explaining what my responsibilities are. Okay, so Adrian, flash forward 3 months. At the 90-day mark, we check in with these employees who are no longer the greenest of the green, but they're still new to the organization, right? So we check in and say, hey, how about now? How are you feeling about that? The clear explanation of your duties and job expectations. So the level of agreement dropped by 8 points. We now have folks saying, I am less clear about what my responsibilities are around here 90 days in. That's counterintuitive, right? Wouldn't you think that they'd have a better understanding, a greater understanding of what it is they're supposed to be contributing to the workplace? So I think it's really, really interesting. I'll stop talking now and take a breath, Jen, and let you chime in with your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think that is really fascinating to me. And we've talked about it so much, but between the two of us. But I think within our industry, one of the greatest challenges that we see is that people are thrown into the frying pan. Day one, maybe even week one goes all right, and they have what they need. They have some good interactions, but then they're kind of left on their own. And one of the biggest things that we see has to do with being given time to complete training during work hours. And that's a thing where only 66%, that's only 2 out of 3 employees, are saying, yes, I'm given time to complete training during work hours. So if I'm coming into an office, a team, a department, and the first couple of days I'm saying, okay, you're responsible for X, Y, Z. Okay, great, that sounds good. And as we go on and people are saying, hey, can you jump in here? Hey, can you do that? But no one's told me how to do that. No one has told me what the outcome that I'm supposed to be aiming for. I haven't gotten any training to understand how to work the systems or log into something. I start to feel kind of incompetent. And that's where it can be very dangerous, because if I can only hang around and handle feeling incompetent for so long. And at some point, I'm going to start saying, you know what? This isn't what I thought I was signing up for. I'm out of here. And I think that's one of the contributing reasons that we're seeing such extremely high turnover within the first 90 days of employment in our industry.
Yeah,
So,
if I may chime in for just a moment, Adrian, I think you'll appreciate this. One of the particularly high risk positions there, with regard to everything we just talked about, is on-site maintenance. So, they think they're signing up for one thing, and then lo and behold, 90 days in, they're like, oh, this is a totally different ball game. This is not what I thought this was going to be.
so I'm so glad that you brought this up, Kiara, because here's what's kind of, to my knowledge, the norm, right? With maintenance, they're coming in on the first day and, hey, welcome, let's do your paperwork. And then, hey, have you done the paperwork? Have you finished the paperwork? By the way, can you really finish it? Like, we really need you to run some work orders. And they drop a stack of work orders. Hey, if you could finish maybe like 30 by the end of the day, that would be great, because we're so far behind. And it's not just this, it's the fact that they weren't being made aware prior to, like during the interviewing process, to just say, hey, property manager, service manager, or both, to say, look, we're in a difficult situation. We're short-staffed. We're budgeted for 3 techs. We only run with 1. We've been running like this for 6 months. We're 1,000 work orders behind, or 100. Whatever the situation is, like, help your candidates make an educated decision, right? Don't just keep them in the dark. Try to oversell a situation. And I think those numbers are affected by situations like this, not just on the maintenance side, but I think especially on the maintenance. Why? Because maintenance is the shortest of all when it comes to personnel, the hardest to get people in. So there's a desperation that, really factors in right there. Like, we're desperate to just get anybody, because we need people, we need bodies. Like, we're, this stack of work orders, the pile grows larger and larger. And then they seem to believe that, hey, withholding information up front, that's just gonna make them sign up. Like, they wouldn't really figure out in like a week or 2 or a day or 2, for that matter. And do you find, Jen, do you find this type of feedback from maintenance personnel after onboarding? Is this common? How common is it?
We do see some of this type of feedback, but I would say that we see this kind of feedback from all of the different categories, not only maintenance. I think that because we've been so short-staffed as an industry, we are just trying to fill positions, and people are getting thrown into the frying pan. We heard one story of a leasing agent. It was their first time working on site. They walk in, and someone hands them a master key and a map and said, okay, start leasing. And they left. So this person who's never been a leasing agent, has never given a tour, doesn't know the software, doesn't know where the leasing agreements or even applications are, they're just suddenly manning an office alone. And so those are the types of things that have happened, can happen, do happen. But I do feel that we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And just talking with some of our clients recently, they're feeling like they're having a little more breathing room, not a lot, they're a little more breathing room because of some of the layoffs that are happening throughout the country right now. More people are really valuing job opportunities. And so they're having more of a talent pool than they've had for a couple of years now. It doesn't solve everything. And it also doesn't solve the onboarding situation of being able to onboard well. But I think we're finally starting to see the opportunity to have more people, so that we're not just taking any warm body to fill any open position. Now we can be a little more thoughtful. We can have a little more clear conversations up front. And we're not always functioning at level 10 desperation. Now it's more like, okay, we really need someone. And let's have a clearer conversation. So it's still a problem, but I don't think it's only isolated to maintenance. I think we're seeing it across the board in every position.
Mhm.
The next point that I wanted to discuss is regarding onboarding as well. So, Kara, I'm going to ask you, do you have knowledge? Do any of your clients do onboarding for on-site personnel off-site? In other words, if you're at Pine Creek Apartments and your first day is today, okay, you don't show up. You either go to the corporate office or to a sister property and you onboard with, how would I say, with a senior manager or with someone, with a mentor, with someone that's already been with a company for a while. They know the ins and outs, and they could actually give you some very good insights of how the company functions, and also walk you through the first day process, paperwork, and all of that, which is pretty stressful.
So we don't have specific data or metrics on exactly how companies are executing their onboarding, but I can tell you anecdotally that absolutely, I've heard of organizations doing exactly as you describe. Multifamily companies, they come in all shapes and sizes. So a company's ability to do that onboarding at a sister property, for example, that's dependent on whether they have another asset across town, right? So that's going to work for some, but not all. I think that's a brilliant strategy if you have the means to be able to do that. It also requires some discipline so that you allow for the time for the new hire to be properly introduced and to train elsewhere. And what I mean by discipline is, and you've said it in your own comments, Adrienne, there's desperation to get that person in their exact seat immediately so they can start contributing. So you really have to be disciplined enough to say, I know you have urgent needs and you have a stack of work orders that's 100 or 1,000 high, but this person is not going to be a valuable contributor until and unless we get them trained up to speed. So you've got to have the space, the manpower for the training, and then you also have to have that willpower to do it right.
And one thing I'd like to add to that too is, I was talking with one client the other day, and they do a really good job of matching up every new employee with a mentor within the company, someone who's in that same role, even if they're not in the same town, but just someone who can be kind of their lifeline. So if they're in the middle of trying to figure out something and they have no clue either how to log in or how to do the next step, they can pick up the phone and they can call that person. They've already been introduced. They already have established some rapport, and they can feel comfortable in asking a question and not feeling ridiculous. They could say, okay, how do I find this thing? And just having a trusted voice, an encouraging voice that's like, oh yeah, just look here. I think that has been really helpful, and the key to the success of one particular client, I think has worked really well, especially because they tend to be more spread out.
I think that's brilliant strategy. I do wanted to ask you, Jen, as a follow-up question on what you just said. Do they track the efficiency of doing this, like having mentors, having people? Are they stating that their retention rates are improving? They see an improvement in that just from doing this piece?
Look at that particular example, I would have to go back and look. But what I do know about that is that certain scores are some of their highest strengths. For example, we have the statement, I know what I'm expected to do in my role. And their numbers in that particular question are significantly higher than what I see with other companies. And while we might take it for granted, like, well, I hope you know what you're supposed to do in your role. But and the other one that they score really high in is, I know who to go to for help. That's another one that shows up in their top 5. And we can take those things for granted, but so often we are in this mindset of fake it till we make it. People are afraid to ask questions. They're afraid to look foolish. And when you create an environment where not only is it okay to ask questions, but we're going to assign you a person to ask questions to, I think it really helps. I think if we went back and dove in, my gut sense would be their retention rate is higher, especially in the first 90 days, because people don't feel like they're just off, floating in the ocean. They are tethered to someone, and they can see that there's a support system in place.
If I may chime in, what I love about that too, Jen, is that person they are tethered to is not their supervisor.
Right.
So they don't have to worry about looking dumb, revealing their ignorance to somebody who might think less of them for that. Or, it doesn't jeopardize their standing in the organization because they can simply reach out to a peer. So it feels like a really safe way for them to get the help that they need.
That's so true.
This was part of the reasons why I was asking, hey, are they doing it off-site? Because, if you do it off-site, chances are you're going to do it with someone that you're not going to be working with on a daily basis. So that just kind of creates builds a comfort zone right there. Because if you're like, hey, I could ask this person a question, they're not going to turn around and tell my boss that I asked a stupid question. Like it just releases some of that tension of the first day of trying to prove yourself, or having to look left, right, am I doing this right, am I saying the right things to these people that I never met in my life. This happened to me many years ago. I started with a company it was my first service manager job, and I asked a lot of questions to my community manager, and after probably like 10 or 15 questions, I kid you not, she took the company SOP manual. It was like this thick, no exaggeration. And she just put it in my lap. She said, I think this would be a very helpful tool for you to find a lot of answers in it. And in all honesty, she meant well. She meant really well, but there were just so many questions that I had that she couldn't answer. The company at the time didn't have a structure for maintenance. Basically, they weren't maybe large enough to afford to have a director in that area. And managers just didn't know so many specifics about policies and procedures when it came to maintenance. So I literally I took that as an opportunity. So I just took the manual. In all reality, they just left it with me. I still have it at home. I have the manual at home. Like this was 2007. So this is 15 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
I still, there are a lot of great things that I learned by reading it. I actually read it. I took the time and read it. And I think it paid off. But about like 18 months later, they promoted me to the regional service director position. So that worked out really well. But it's happening out there. It's happening and it's hard. So Sweet Bunny, it's in a feedback business. Is it safe to say? Right?
Yes,
absolutely.
So you're in a feedback business. So my next question is for you, Jen. You do provide a lot of feedback, a lot of actionable feedback. In other words, companies could build an action plan based on the feedback that you're providing. It's very accurate. It's gold. Now, what is the importance of that feedback that you're providing being being looked at and actually being used to improve the work environment? How important is that piece?
Oh, it's so critical. It's the piece. Why ask a question if you're not going to look at or listen to the answer? It's like having a conversation where, I ask you, hey, Adrian, how are you doing? And you say, hey, I'm doing great. How are you? And I just walk away. You're going to be left going, what was that? It's the same thing with our employees. If we ask them, how are things going? And they say, well, this is going well, but this is not going very well. And it's crickets. And then I come back a couple months later. I'm like, well, how are things going now? Well, why bother? It's not worth their time if they've been taught, if you ask for feedback and I give it to you, I now learn that you're not going to do anything about it. I don't know if you've read it and you're ignoring it, or I don't know if you've read it and you can't do anything about it, or I don't know if you've just ignored it completely. So because I don't know the answer to any of those scenarios, I'm just not going to bother. But for companies who, and this is what I tell all of our clients after our very first baseline, they've done their very first survey with all their employees. We've got the results. I go through the executive review with them and I say, now the most important thing you can do, the number one thing, is having a meeting, an all hands, all company-wide meeting, and letting them know, we heard you. Here's what you told us is going well. Here are some things that we know that are important to you. And here are 1 or 2 things that we're going to be focusing on based on what you told us. By doing that one thing, just by letting them know, we heard you. And in fact, here's the good and the bad. That really, the engagement of companies will go up a couple of points just by having that meeting, because people know that they've been heard. They feel like you're actually paying attention, and then they'll be watching to see if action actually occurs. But, there are some companies that are simply doing an employee feedback program to check a box and say, yeah, we talked, we ask our employees how they're doing. But you can see very clearly and very quickly which companies are simply checking a box. And you'll see very quickly that response rates will fall off a cliff because their employees are like, okay, well, that was a waste of time. But for companies that are constantly saying, okay, we heard you, here's what we heard, and here's what we're doing, you will see those response rates not only maintain, but actually increase, because the employees are like, wow, this is worth it. They're actually paying attention, and they like being a part of the conversation and impacting and influencing company decisions that are going forward.
You just said something that's extremely, extremely important. The need to be heard. So I'd like to take this question to Kara and ask Kara, from the feedback that you're getting, the questions that you're asking, how important is this piece? How important is it for employees to feel that they're being heard, their voices are being heard? Not necessarily that, hey, everything we're gonna say out there is gonna change the way we want it, but that we are being heard. What's how important is that? And then maybe if you feel comfortable, share some great examples, practical examples from your clients where employees feel like they being heard and things are improving because of that.
Yeah, so I think it's really the backbone of a good work environment where communication flows in both directions. And communication challenges are always a hot button in all the feedback that we receive from all employee groups. Challenges with being listened to, having a voice, being able to offer suggestions for improvement, and the company taking them seriously or listening to them at all. But on the flip side of that, with communication challenges, is we hear a lot about team members saying, I don't know what's going on. Nobody tells me anything. So it's a big umbrella, good communication, and there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to figure out what's working well and what's not working so well and make improvements. It comes up, communication risks, it comes up as one of the top 4 risks that Jen and I have identified that leads to employee attrition. So really worth the emphasis for all supervisors, I think, to figure out how to improve communication within your workspace. But you asked for some examples from clients. One of the things that I want to stress is when we work with our clients and they get feedback from their employees, one of the things that we're really after is to try to figure out the difference between what supervisors think their employees think and what employees actually think, because there can be a really wide gap. And until companies are utilizing a feedback program, supervisors are kind of operating on a lot of assumptions, what they think they know about their team members. And that's a really dangerous space. And what they think they know and how employees really feel can be very, very different. And it's not always negative. Sometimes we find out that employees are really happy about something that leaders thought needed to change or they needed to fix. So it's not always negative information that they get from the team members. So here's an example that I wanted to share that just I hope will kind of illustrate that point. We love to work with Apartment Dynamics. They were, I believe, the very first client to roll out our employee feedback program. And the leaders there, led by Mary Gwynn, they're just so open to embracing learning from the input from their team members. So anyway, the example I wanted to share with you is they, during the pandemic, they took to doing frequent all hands on deck meetings, which I believe were conducted via Zoom or Teams or something, cameras on, all employees meeting with leadership. It was a very frequent huddle. I believe the pace was weekly, where everybody was getting together because there was so much information to share with policies and procedures changing by the hour, right? Thanks to everything that we were learning and dealing with the pandemic. So at some point, the world calmed down and things, started to normalize, and the leadership started to think, hey, maybe we don't need to have these meetings so frequently, and we can give people some time back in their schedule. But rather than making the change, they put it out to the group first to say, hey, here's what we're thinking. We assume you guys all would prefer to get back to business as usual and get a little bit of time back in your day. So we're going to go ahead and scale back these meetings. Everybody good with that? And the team spoke up and said, no, that's our very favorite thing. Don't get rid of those meetings. We love those meetings. We love having time with the company's leadership. And that was such a surprise to the leaders. But, they totally did what the group suggested, and they maintained those meetings because they're so productive. So stuff like that, it is just, you got to check your assumptions. You think you know what the team wants, but you may not actually know. So you've got to get input from the associates who are doing the work.
I'd love to share another example, because Apartment Dynamics, you're right, they're so good, and they really do tune in, and their people really do know that their leaders are tuning in. And another company, Paragon, they were also one of our very first companies that rolled out with us. They were dealing with, like everyone, super high maintenance turnover, and they're in the Great Lakes area in Michigan, and so snow is a big problem in the winter, and that's where they would see the highest turnover is in January, February. People would just get burnt out with the snow situation, and so they knew from the survey that from maintenance team that they did not have the tools and resources they felt they needed. And so they did a focus group and said, okay, what would be helpful? And one of the things they identified was, how do we deal with snow removal? And there was so much overtime because of snow removal. They were getting so far behind with work orders. So the president said, what's a better way to do this? How do we deal with snow removal? And what they found was, they just wanted more ability to make decisions about it. If they could hire out some snow removal, whether it was just for the parking lots or whether it was for the walkways, and maybe it was just shoveling and we can do the salting. But they asked for and received the autonomy to make the decision for each property of what level of snow removal assistance they needed. And so the president was cautiously optimistic, but a little worried about how's this going to go, because what he assumed was that everyone would have full snow removal all the time. And what he found was that each individual property, they really were thoughtful about what they wanted to outsource. And they looked at their budgets and they looked at their manpower and they made decisions accordingly. And their turnover for maintenance dropped dramatically, not just a little, a lot, down to something like 18%, where it had been well over 50%. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for him, and a lot of companies are learning this, is the wisdom of the team. Sometimes they don't realize what amazing wisdom and experience comes from our on-site team members who've been there, done that at a variety of different places. And if they would just stop and listen, some really great practical ideas can really come to fruition. And they really did experience that.
I love that you shared those magnificent examples, and there's two things coming to mind, right? One is that treat people like they make a difference, and they will make a difference. And secondly, when you're in a leadership position, you're not in a leadership position expected to make all the decisions for everybody. Ask people that are the experts, and the best experts that you have in your organization are going to be the site teams, because they're there every day. if you're corporate, you're not there every day. I'm sorry. Like, you could be a brilliant individual person, but if you're not doing this on a daily basis, day in and day out, whatever the site team does, whatever task, if you're not doing it on a daily basis, chances are you're not going to be more qualified than that person, that performer on site, to give actionable feedback, to give good feedback, right? And to provide solutions too. Because it's not just that, okay, we're going to describe a problem. A lot of people, if they feel like they're being appreciated and heard, they come up with solutions too. They'll find the solutions for you. All you really have to do is ask.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of leadership oftentimes thinks that the ideas that they get from on-site team members will be pie in the sky, really expensive, and I would say 99% of the time, the best ideas, the most practical ideas, come exactly what you're saying, right from on site, from the people who are dealing with it every single day.
This reminds me of a previous experience of mine, where leadership of one of the companies I worked for at the time said that, hey, we don't really want to open. We had like service managers meetings. Make sure that you're not opening this to questions for too long. Like, you're leaving it at the very end for like 2 minutes, because this is gonna be turning into a complaining session. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm gonna ask along the way. I'm gonna stop and ask questions, ask for feedback. And at the end, if they have 30 minutes to ask questions, I'll spend 30 minutes to to listen to them. What's the whole point of having meetings just to talk at people? Like, this is not doing any type of good. Just telling them what they're not doing right, and how the thing should be. Like, if it's not a two-way street, forget about it. Don't ever think that you're gonna make things better. Like, there's not even a point into having meetings. It's better not to have any meetings than to just have a meeting where you are the one talking at your people. Like, instead, just making a conversation, just make it conversational and learn from it, right? Learn from it, because we learn so much by listening to understand, not by listening to respond. Okay, whilst the other person is talking, I'm building my answer in my mind because I had to provide an immediate answer. Just take a second or two, take 5 seconds and process. Like, try to understand what the other person is saying, versus then I got my answer ready for it. That's not the whole point. So the next topic that I want to touch on, and this is something that Kara and I discussed on the very first episode, but this was over a year ago. So this time I'm gonna ask you, Jen, right? The labor shortages. Let's talk a little bit about what you see for causes. What caused this significant, tremendous labor shortage that we're dealing with as an industry, and what possible solutions we have out there to help management companies. Practical advice.
Yeah, I think every industry is experiencing labor shortage, and it has been really, really bad and very, very, very disruptive. And like I said, I think we're starting to see a little glimmer of a light at the end of the tunnel. But I think there are a few things that have really factored in. When we look at the shutdown with COVID, and almost everyone had to go remote. We had a vital few, a skeleton crew on site that were required to be there, required to still do some emergency service requests and things like that. But the vast majority of team members had or were forced to work remote, or at least work in an isolated situation. And I think what a lot of people realized is, some people, depending on whether they were a caregiver of some kind, whether for children or for aging parents, they realized the necessity of having flexibility. A lot of people realize, like, I like this remote thing. I'd like to do more of that. Some people realize I can get paid a lot more doing something less restrictive somewhere else in a different industry. So we were dealing with a whole lot of different types of things. And I think as we're going back to business that's being conducted in a more familiar manner. I personally don't like to say we're going back to normal because, oh my gosh, what is normal? I don't even know. But
Quite normal.
I know, but we're going back into business that's more familiar now. It's more similar to what we saw pre-pandemic. And there's a lot of companies that they just want it to go back to the way it was, period, without looking at the lessons learned, without looking at, the benefit, the technologies that were put into place, the centralization that they were able to accomplish, the flexibility that we were able to grant our teams. Some people are just ignoring all those lessons learned completely. And I think what we have the opportunity to do as an industry and company by company is look at what lessons did we learn internally? How were we able to staff and manage our communities by providing flexibility? Because we really had to deal with things like childcare, and when kids were having to learn on Zoom, someone had to be hanging out with the kids. There was nowhere for them to go, and our teams made it work. They were able to support each other and stagger things enough to make it all work. That's what people are looking for. It's not necessarily that everyone wants to work remote, but I think that people are asking for a little more flexibility, a little more grace, so that they can manage their personal lives a little more effectively. They don't want to shirk on the work, but they do want some flexibility. So I think if we can be open to different ways of working, I know that there's some companies that are looking at taking or getting rid of on-call and changing their work hours so that their maintenance team members start later in the day, they end later in the day, because they found that the majority of their emergency work orders happened around 6 or 7 in the evening. Well, that's not so hard. That's not so difficult to make that shift. And there's a lot of maintenance people who would be like, I'm all about that. I would rather start my day later, end later, so that I'm not, having to go home with an on-call phone as frequently, for example. Or people having more flexibility. Do we really need to start at 8 o'clock in the morning? Or can we start a little bit later? Can we have some flex schedules? Can we work 4 10-hour days? There's a lot of different things that we can do to make our industry more attractive and flexible, and still get all of the work done, because we did it before. We did it during COVID. And so let's take those lessons and apply it, because then everybody wins. Our employees win, our companies win by having less turnover and greater productivity. Our residents win because they're dealing with happier employees and more consistent employees. So there's a lot of things that we can do that will really positively impact our ability to attract and retain employees.
I couldn't say it better. Let's do things for the win. Let's all win. Let's all win. We could all win. It's not a win-lose situation. Like if I'm winning, you're losing. We could all win, really, from this. And that's the amazing thing and the amazing opportunity that I see in front of us as an industry. Yeah, I like to point out the things that must be improved, that we need to improve on. I do that all the time, but I always like to bring solutions too. Hey, this is something that we could do. I don't want for people to think that, hey, this is a negative thing, I'm beating down the industry. Those are things that, we need to speak about, we need to speak up about, so then if we don't start the conversation, how those things are going to become, better all of a sudden. We need to discuss, and then we need to come up with solutions. And I think there were a lot of solutions and a lot of great stories that were that you both share with us right here with the audience. And I'd love to have you back here to do another episode soon, if you would accept my invitation.
Absolutely. We have a lot more to talk about, Adrian. We're going to have to do this at least 2 or 3 more times, I think.
I think we could make it regular, a regular thing, Chiara, to say, maybe once a quarter we touch base and we have a conversation, because, things change so fast. And in all honesty, I'm not the type of, podcast host to go through a list of 10 or 15 topics just to, rush through. I want to get the meaning of, I want to provide some meaningful content. And the way I can provide is, to let my guests talk and, let them say, let them share their wisdom. So it's been a lot of great wisdom out here. I'm very grateful to for both of you to come to the podcast. I do want to say in closing that, there's something that, you wish you would have said, you didn't have the opportunity to say. Kara, I want to start with you. What is something that you would like to say in closing of today's episode?
Well, I think in my closing remark, I'm going to go with this one, Adrian. I really think that, like Jen, I do see some glimmers of hope in the labor situation. However, I think 2023 is going to continue to be a tough slog. I really do think it's going to continue to challenge us in rental housing. Filling those seats is just going to be very, very challenging. And therefore, I think it makes all the sense in the world to do absolutely everything that you can to prevent your employees from leaving in the first place. I think that's the best recruitment strategy, is to keep your people in place. And that's where I really think the focus should be for the new year. So you can worry a little bit less about recruitment, which is going to continue to be impossibly hard, and focus on employee retention.
Jen?
I love it. I have to completely agree with Kara. And the other thing I would say, and we touched on it just barely, is the importance of leadership, and leadership really being the voice of what the vision is. Employees really want to hear from leadership. They want to see them set the tone, and that sets the tone, everything from just how we speak to each other, to the positive attitude that we bring to our work, to providing time for training and making that a priority. Those things can't just be, you can't just assume that HR is going to be managing that and handling it. They will, but what they need is the support and the encouragement and the championing of executive leadership, saying, these are the things that are important to us as an organization and the things that are important to me. And that really sets the table nicely for all of these new employees and our existing employees, that they really do want to do good work. And we just have to make it possible and set it up for them.
I do want to make a point to make this the first topic of our next conversation, leadership. And I hope to get you back here, not in a year, not in 3 months, maybe sooner than that, if your schedules allow and you would like to come back, because there's just so much more to cover. In closing, I want to thank you both so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts here and your wisdom with me and with the audience. I hope to see you back here soon.
Thank you so much, Adrian. It's been such a pleasure. We'd love to be back.
Yeah, pick the date. We will be there. Thank you so much for having us.
I'll take you up on it for sure. You'll hear from me like as soon as we finish this conversation.
Great.
Everybody, thank you very much for watching us today. This is Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host, and I hope to see you back here soon. Have a great day.